All right. So, with that meaty introduction into what is money under our belts, let's move on now and talk about what is Bitcoin. As per all these sections, I want to talk about three main components. The first I'm going to talk about in this section is what is blockchain, which is a key technology behind Bitcoin. Number two is just an overview and brief history of Bitcoin. And then third is just a outline of the different components and participants of the Bitcoin system and network. So first, let's talk about blockchain. Blockchain is one of the buzziest words over the last decade plus. And a lot of people you'll actually hear say, well, it's not about Bitcoin. It's really about the blockchain. And it couldn't be more the opposite. It's actually all about Bitcoin and not at all about the blockchain. The blockchain is just a means or an ingredient that helps get to Bitcoin. But let's talk about what blockchain is. So a blockchain is really just a decentralized ledger, a ledger being a database. And so if you were to go and kind of look at the Bitcoin blockchain today, it's really just a data structure and database of every single transaction that's ever been made since the since the start of the Bitcoin network. And many different computers, right? You as an individual could go and pretty easily run what's called a full node. We'll get to that later. But you could run and store a copy of that ledger and of that database that has the full history of every transaction. And so by having these multiple copies stored up kind of all around the world, the Bitcoin blockchain can be said to be decentralized. Now, let's talk about why would we want to do that? Because the fact is blockchains are actually incredibly inefficient. A lot of people think about blockchain as this like cutting edge, like magic technology. It's actually just a profoundly inefficient, slow database. That's what a blockchain is. And so if you're trying to do any kind of centralized task, you would be far better off going with a more traditional database or any number of existing technologies. So why in the heck would we want to use blockchain here? It's all about the decentralization part. And really, that is a means to try and get to this end of trustless money or trust minimization at the very least. So think about it today. You go through your different financial intermediaries, whether it's a PayPal, whether it's your bank, whether it's any number of these centralized entities. And for the most part, many of us can probably say, hey, our experiences are fairly smooth. But if you think about it, when let's say you're sending a bank wire from your bank account to someone or something. Number one, you have to trust that your money's actually there. With fractional banking, we know that that's actually not true. If all of us went to Chase Bank today and demanded our deposits, they literally would not be able to give it to us because it's not there. That's why bank runs are so scary for governments and banking systems. Secondly, you have to trust that they're actually going to propagate your money. What if for whatever reason you're trying to send it to an entity that your bank deems bad, right? For whatever reason, it could be, hey, they don't, they haven't offset their emissions, and it could be anything. And so you have this potential censorship of your transactions that, that could occur. And so ultimately, you have to trust these different central intermediaries to do what you want with your money. And a lot of folks are recognizing, especially as we get deeper and deeper into this age of fiat money, that that these institutions are not to be trusted, right? That's been the kind of wake-up call that has led a lot of folks to come to Bitcoin. So again, blockchain, really nothing more than a decentralized ledger or database. Horribly inefficient. However, very good if you want to create this decentralized system that avoids having any kind of central either point of failure or central party that can potentially censor transactions and control what you can do with your money. Now, enter Bitcoin. Satoshi Nakamoto, which is the kind of anonymous name behind Bitcoin, in 2009 generated or mined the first Genesis block of the blockchain. And we'll talk a lot more in the next section about, okay, what does that mean? How do Bitcoin transactions work and how do they get kind of put into the blockchain? But January 2009 was when the Bitcoin blockchain was first started. And since then, it's been just doing its thing for the last, 11 plus years. And, and that's really it. No one knows who Satoshi Nakamoto is. There's still probably 1 million Bitcoin attached to his address from all the way back then that have not moved to this day. And so, whoever it was, a lot of rumors are that it could be someone like Hal Finney, who was the recipient of the very first Bitcoin transaction that Satoshi sent. Hal has unfortunately since passed away. And if it's him, then there you have it. If it's not him, clearly whoever Satoshi is has chosen to remain anonymous for fear of governments coming after him and him or her, and rightly so. Bitcoin really is the very first successful implementation of a blockchain. It's a public blockchain, meaning anyone can run it. It's open source. Anyone can look at the code. There are developers who are building kind of new features as we speak. And so Bitcoin really can be condensed down to trustless or trust minimized, at the very least, censorship resistant money, digital money as well. And so when we think back to how it addresses those key properties of money, let's do a quick analysis. Scarcity. Bitcoin's monetary policy is arguably its most exciting feature. It has a hard cap of 21 million Bitcoin. That's all there will ever be. Each Bitcoin can be subdivided into 100 million components, which are called Satoshis or sats, as you'll often hear them called. And so there's plenty of divisibility, plenty for everyone on Earth. It's got this, hard cap in terms of scarcity, as we talked about. And it's got a fixed issuance curve, fixed supply curve, which is the first time we've ever had that for any form of money. Even for gold, which has averaged maybe a 2-ish% inflation rate, when the price of gold in fiat terms goes up, that does tend to attract more gold miners who are seeking to capitalize on the higher price of gold. And so that can then increase the issuance rate or the inflation rate of gold. Bitcoin, in contrast to that, is fixed. And so it doesn't matter how many miners come into the Bitcoin space, it's still going to generate the same amount of new Bitcoin in a kind of decreasing curve all the way up until when the last Bitcoin is mined in somewhere around the year 2140. So hard cap, highly divisible, and it's very portable, right? It's digital. It can be sent at the speed of light across an internet connection, and so it builds on where gold was. Unfortunately, its pitfall. It's fungible. We'll get into that more in later sections, and et cetera, et cetera. And so Bitcoin has arguably perfected those properties of money, and it is the discovery of digital scarcity. I'm going to link some good materials on some of the other projects that came in to prior to Bitcoin, things like DigiCash. So there were prior attempts by some of the cypherpunks to create this kind of trustless money system. Bitcoin was the first successful implementation of that because Satoshi Nakamoto combined kind of the best features of these prior projects, but then also solved for different things like, the double spending problem, i.e., let's say I have a digital token and I send it to someone. How do I how do I verifiably prove that I haven't just kind of created a copy of that token to send? And so I've not only paid someone for a service, but I've also kept the original, kind of unit. And so Bitcoin really perfects those properties of money. It has been cranking away kind of ever since the Genesis block in January 2009. And so let's now round out this section by just talking about the third piece, which are really the participants and components of the Bitcoin system. So there are a few key actors. There are users, so folks who are holding or hodling, as is the meme, Bitcoin. That just means you're, holding it as a savings. Bitcoin really is first and foremost a savings technology. A lot of people think of it as an investment, but in today's age, it's really a way to preserve your wealth. And we just so happen to be so early in its adoption curve that that wealth is also going to appreciate significantly as the world comes onto Bitcoin. But you have users, right? So these are people who are, who can transact on the network. I can send some Bitcoin to you for whatever. You can send it to me for whatever. Secondly, there are what are called nodes. Nodes are just computers that have downloaded the Bitcoin open source software. So again, you could go download Bitcoin Core today and run it on a computer. And each of these nodes can be a full node, meaning they hold the full version of the Bitcoin blockchain. So they hold the full history of all transactions that have ever been made. Or you could have a partial node, which holds a more kind of condensed version of it. And so these nodes are really important. They are basically propagating transactions across the network. So let's say that I want to send some Bitcoin to a friend. I need to kind of initiate that transaction and propagate it across the different nodes so that everyone can kind of see and agree that, Ian is sending this amount of Bitcoin to this other participant on the network. And we all agree that this is a valid sort of transaction. Ian indeed owns those Bitcoin, and he indeed, can kind of send it, right? And so nodes are helping to verify and validate transactions and propagate those transactions across the network so that we can form consensus. And we'll get to that in a later section. That is really one of the huge pieces of this is how can we reach consensus, when I don't know any of these other participants on the network. So those are nodes. And then finally, there are kind of special nodes, heavier duty nodes, if you will, called miners. And so conceptually similar to gold mining, a Bitcoin miner has to expend real energy in order to mine new Bitcoin. And how that works is, let's say that there's 100 participants on the network, all making transactions with one another. What a miner will come and do is package up those transactions into a block and attach that block to the blockchain to make all those transactions execute or settle. Now, how does a miner earn the right to do that? They have to, what essentially amounts to guess many, many, many different times. Now, that sounds a bit silly just off the face of it, but we'll talk in the next section about why that is so, so important and crucial. But you essentially have real energy expenditure, and the miner who kind of wins the right or earns the right to package the next block up wins, number one, the transaction fees that were in the block. So you pay a small transaction fee to be able to send a transaction to someone, as well as what's called the block subsidy or the block reward. And so, that's essentially a small amount of new Bitcoin that gets generated. And that rate of new Bitcoin that gets generated per block is cut in half every 4 years, according to what's called the Bitcoin halving cycle. And so that's why you have this kind of asymptotically, declining issuance curve, because the new issuance is being cut in half every 4 years. So users, nodes, which are propagating and validating transactions, and then miners, right, who are actually packaging the transactions up and proposing the blocks which again, the nodes then also verify. So those are the different participants. And then kind of finally, the other really key concept is a wallet. Think of this like an account, a bank account. A wallet is just a piece of software that allows you to interface with the Bitcoin blockchain. And so a wallet, there's lots and lots of different wallet providers out there. There's cold storage wallets, which are like actual hard devices, like a thumb drive almost. There's what are called hot wallets, which are, just kind of on your desktop computer connected to, an internet connection. And we'll talk about some of the different pros and cons as we go along. But that's really it, right? You've got wallets where you store and interface and send and receive funds. You have miners, nodes, users. And so for now, we're going to go ahead and leave this video here. And we'll cover a lot more of the kind of nuts and bolts in terms of how all that actually works in the next section.